Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Philip Martin, an Emmy-winning director whose new project is the Netflix film Scoop about Prince Andrew's disastrous interview with BBC Newsnight. Philip, right there at the top there, it's an incredibly infamous interview. And I guess just to start, I'm sure you were aware of it, obviously, as so many millions of people are. But I guess like what was it about this that you felt would make such a great and compelling story to direct?
One of the things that I found extraordinary about the interview, and like everyone, I watched it and was dumbfounded, and then it had this sort of a strange kind of afterlife on social media as well, where lots of the clips from the interview sort of went around the world, and there was this extraordinary response to it. But I can remember hearing some of the journalists who were involved in the interview say that Andrew had walked away from the interview thinking that it had gone quite well, pretty well, and that he'd achieved what he wanted to achieve. And that just seemed like a really interesting space for a drama to inhabit, the difference between, if you like, his worldview and the worldview of the planet. And so that was immediately when the actual interview happened, I thought, gosh, that's interesting. And why does he think that? And how does he think that? And just the difference between perspectives and points of view, and how one person looks at one thing and how another person looks at it. It seemed very, very fertile territory for drama, for a story. And then when I heard that it was happening, Peter Moffat had written a script, and Peter I know and had worked with before, and so it felt like it was a lovely opportunity to explore it again, and to try to unpick it a bit and try to figure out how everybody ended up in this situation, where it's very easy afterwards to say it's completely disastrous and what was everyone thinking. But obviously, these are all people who, are thoughtful and are strategic and want to achieve something from the interview. And you think, okay, well, how did it get to this situation? And that's the story that we tell in Scoop.
You do it wonderfully. I think it's such a great film. I think it's a great journalism film. And the thing I loved watching it is like we're saying here, like it's a very well-known story. And yet I was on the edge of my seat throughout the whole thing. And I found that really just, I think your work as a director and the script, like you're saying, all of that combined makes it so taut. But I guess how do you approach something where the audience knows what's happening or will happen? How do you generate so much tension and drama out of this as a filmmaker, and how did you kind of think about that?
It's a very interesting observation that you make, and it was an area that I was very scared of, because when you come at something as a director, and when you're looking at it, in a sense, you're looking for characters to make active choices. You're looking, and that's how they define their characters and how they move through the story. And in a way, the interview itself, although it's extraordinary, from Emily, it's not an active process. It's not like A Few Good Men, where Tom Cruise is sort of hammering the Jack Nicholson character, twisting it and turning him and making him so frustrated that eventually he just explodes and reveals himself. Or it's not like Frost Nixon, where David Frost is goading or seducing Nixon and gradually getting this extraordinary confession from Nixon that, it's okay to break the law if you're the president, basically. And so it doesn't have that sort of narrative structure to it. It's a very seductive piece of interviewing. It's a very subtle piece of interviewing. And it's sort of, I guess, creating a comfortable environment for a person to reveal themselves in. But from a director's point of view, it's slightly scary, because there aren't great big sort of, if you like, a boxing match battles between the interviewer and the interviewee. So in some ways it was, but in a way, sometimes it's good to be scared. And when you're scared, you think, or when you're thinking, gosh, how should I do that? then that's interesting territory to be in. And I suppose what we tried to do ultimately comes down to the performances, extraordinary performances. In particular, in the interview, Rufus and Gillian as Emily Maitlis and Andrew. I guess it's you're trying to put the audience in people's heads, and so you're trying to bring the audience to the interview with all of the perspectives of the different characters. Andrew thinking quite confident and thinking that it's gonna that actually he's an impatient man and he just needs to fix this situation, and he's very much a kind of silver bullet kind of guy. I'm going to do one interview, I want the problem to go away, this is going to fix it. Emily coming to it having perhaps she feels not asked Clinton the questions that she should have asked him, and so kind of conflicted herself, thinking perhaps whether she should go hard on Andrew, if you like, to make up for what she didn't do before, or as she has a conversation with Sam, just to let him speak and to let him relax, and then that will be how they do it. And of course Sam, the sort of central character of our film, wondering how it's all going to go, and Amanda, the woman who sort of believes in Andrew and who's brokered this interview and is trying to make things work for Andrew and believes in his innocence and believes in his sort of ability to speak to people and to connect to people. So I guess by sort of building all of the human dramas within that story, you're in the interview room, not just seeing the interview as you've seen it before, but perhaps seeing it through the different perspectives of all of these characters. And I suppose, and I think that's what the film was trying to do, to tell the story of the women who got the interview, to tell the story a little bit from Andrew's perspective too. And somehow, I guess that's what drama can do as opposed to documentary. Documentary can give you information and obviously emotion, but in some ways drama puts you into the headspace of the protagonists and allows you to look at it, even if their perspective is flawed, but through a very particular perspective, and allow you to come at the material, come at the story in a new way.
You definitely do that with this, like you're saying. Like I think the movie doesn't, even though we're like we know what Prince Andrew is accused of and all these different things, the movie doesn't really demonize, like you're not making villains out of any of these people, which I found really interesting, or not like they're not like, it's not like it's very balanced, I guess, in that regard. And I really appreciated that because it lets you kind of, like you said, like come at it just like head on and make your own kind of takeaways from what you're seeing here. And I guess like with regard to Prince Andrew, you mentioned these great performances. I mean, I think Rufus is incredible, but what was it about him? Like, I guess I would not have picked him to play Prince Andrew, maybe off the top of my head, but like why he's so, now I can't imagine anybody else doing it. So I guess like, how did you kind of come up with why him? And like, how did you kind of like discuss the performance with him? Because it is, all these performances are great, but I mean, I think he is also, this is a remarkable transformation and everything like that.
It's a great transformation. It's a great role as well. And I think that one of the things I think that drew Rufus to it was that there's sort of multiple narratives playing in Andrew's head while he's answering these questions. He's remembering the rehearsals. He's remembering what he's supposed to say. He's remembering what he's sort of limiting what editing himself. And so I think there's lots of interesting character performance things that Rufus was absorbed by. But I think that I mean, I suppose two things. One, I think Rufus had an appetite for it and a confidence for it, and in a way, you were talking about not wanting to demonize Andrew. I think Rufus was just determined to sort of he was fearless about it, whereas I think you know, there's a view in which post the interview, Andrew, you know, he has he had a reputation before, he has a worse reputation now, and so I think perhaps there's perhaps a way to play him which is sort of cautious or perhaps leaning into the fact that the audience aren't going to like him, and Rufus just had a confidence to sort of play the person and play how Andrew was seeing it. And one of the things we forget, particularly as Andrew, you know, is a 60-year-old man, you forget that he was once in his 20s. You know, the future of the royal family, the person who didn't have the pressure of the you know, of having to become the monarch, and so was relaxed and informal, able to communicate with people. People found him really attractive. He was used to getting, you know, he went on a visit to Australia, people sort of screaming and, you know, and mobbing him, you know, so he had had that kind of boy band experience in his 20s, and Rufus really understood that. I think that inside this person who doesn't look like that, there's somebody else, that there's somebody else in there, and I think that was Rufus got that. The in some ways the misplaced charm of Andrew, the twinkle in his eye, the self-confidence in his own ability to talk his way out of a situation, that slight sort of mischievousness that he has, and an ability to communicate. Rufus sort of absolutely kind of got all of that, and yeah. And then, you know, the other thing sort of on a technical sort of detail, which is not, you know, important, but in some ways was interesting, was that this kind of triangle or with the eyes and the nose and the mouth, that Rufus and Andrews are not that dissimilar. So in a way, this area here, we kept relatively, you know, free of prosthetics, and we just sort of built the prosthetics around the rest of the face. But that's really where you do your acting. So it allowed Rufus to sort of, if you like, come through the prosthetics and still be, if you like, transformed into Andrew visually, but not to lose his agency over his own ability to act. So it was a great work by our prosthetics and hair and makeup team. So yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think it's so great. And I meant, like, we talking here, obviously Emily Amalis is played by Gillian Anderson. I interviewed her and she was saying that she was like not necessarily convinced that she was right for the role, and you and Peter had to like convince her otherwise. I guess like why, what was, I mean, it's again another person where I'm like, I can't imagine someone else playing Emily Maitlis, not just because they kind of look alike, like when they carry themselves as seemingly in similar ways, but I guess like, but so like I guess like that probably is why you kind of were thinking of her for this, but also then like how did you get her over the hump to want to maybe do it as well?
It's that funny thing that we were talking about before, which is that sometimes when you're scared, obviously that means it's dangerous and you shouldn't go there. And sometimes when you're scared, it means that it's sort of challenging and you therefore should go there. And it's sort of trying to kind of figure out what's the right, whether it's the right level of scaredness. And I think Gillian was apprehensive about this, for all of the reasons you described. But I also think that in some ways, the appeal of it, the complexity of it, and in a way a bit similar to what we were talking about with Rufus, that there are sort of multiple narratives playing in your head as an actor. She's trying to, as Emily, negotiate her relationship with Andrew, but she's trying to stay 3 questions ahead in terms of there's all of this stuff going on, which is sort of narratively, dramatically interesting. And yeah, I think it's a great story, and Gillian loved that side of it, and I think loved the sort of sense of a gladiatorial conflict between her and another protagonist in an arena, you know, ultimately after all of the the first hour of the film, it basically settles down into this, or it builds to this moment under the spotlights, under the lights, in the darkness between her and Andrew, and I think that that was really appealing. So yeah, thankfully she overcame her anxiety. And with Gillian, we did a lot of, we changed the color of her eyes, and we did an amazing wig. And Emily has a very strong, a very particular approach to makeup, and so we matched that, and so all of that was we didn't use very much prosthetics with Gillian, but we transformed her in a different way.
Yeah. Do you, when you're recreating, obviously, like you said, like the movie builds this interview, you're recreating a lot of the interview, or like at least a portion of it, right? I mean, I think the interview
Yeah.
was like maybe an hour or whatever it was. Do you like, had you kind of approach that aspect of it? And again, like we're talking about, I guess, but like making it feel unique in its own thing for the movie, but also like recreating something that people are aware of, I guess. And like, how'd you kind of like figure that out?
I guess it is just a balance. As you say, people really know the interview, and so we were very keen to make sure that it felt familiar to them, and in some ways, perhaps in ways that you as an audience don't really, you can't quite put your finger on. But we basically duplicated the room. We built a set which matched the set, the room in Buckingham Palace where the interview took place. We printed a new carpet, so that it was the same carpet. We copied all the pictures. We then used, which we use a lot in the film, we matched all of the BBC's camera angles. They took 6 little digital cameras with them, and we put ours in the same places on the same lens sizes and doing the same thing. And so we got it so that our stuff visually was in the same ballpark. But then we're cutting between the filming of the event and our filming of it, and we shoot a brilliant DOP, Nanu Seagal. We shot anamorphic, so our lenses work in a different way to the camera lenses. And again, often this stuff sounds technical, and ultimately it's just ultimately emotional. You're trying to create a sort of an emotion in the audience where they're thinking, okay, when I see this shot, I know that I'm in Andrew's headspace, and when I see this shot, I know that I'm in the public view that Andrew is presenting to the world, and you're sort of cutting between all of those different points of view, and yeah, hopefully trying to sort of balance it so that it feels recognizably the interview that people know. But sometimes sometimes you've got to be loose as well about these things and make it work in its own terms as drama and as its own narrative.
And then I know we have to wrap up, but I would be remiss if I didn't also mention, you mentioned like Sam McAlister as a producer, and Billie Piper plays her in the movie, and I just found that it's a really compelling performance, and like amid this story, you're telling her story as well, and I found all of that like really really compelling. And I think the trials and tribulations that she faced as like a producer and like kind of are greatly explored in this. I guess like for lack of a better, like why did that feel like the right entry point, I guess, into the story, and having Sam slash Billie as maybe like the audience kind of surrogate, I guess, or whatever you would say for this story.
Yeah, I think it's such a good question. I mean, Sam, the real Sam is an extraordinary person, and Billie's performance is phenomenal. And I think what I loved about it, and I thought what Peter's script really captured, was that in some ways it allows you to enter the story as an outsider. And I worked a few years ago. I worked on the first 2 seasons of The Crown, and you were filming the palace and the people who live in the palace from the point of view of being inside the bubble and looking out at the world. And that was the great thing about The Crown, was that you bring people into that world and you give them privileged access to the inside of the of that world. And I think what's interesting or amazing about Sam and Billie's performance is that in some ways it's like the rest of us. So when Billie jumps in a cab, goes drives through London, goes through Buckingham Palace gates, goes into the palace. It's our point of view. None of us have been there. None of us have driven through the gates. And so her kind of, if you like, relatable, but also just sort of, I don't know, un in a way unjudgy view of it all was such a fresh perspective on the whole story. And Sam's all about the work. Sam's all about getting the interview, figuring out where the Achilles heel is on the various people that she has to get them to, she has to sort of bring in to do an interview. So it just felt like a really interesting and new and fresh take on the world of Buckingham Palace and the world of the privilege that exists there, and Sam's very kind of I guess unique perspective on it all felt a lovely way into the story.
Yeah, it definitely works, and the movie is great. And if you're
Thank
watching
you.
this, you can watch it right now on Netflix. Philip Martin, an Emmy award-winning director of Scoop. Thank you so much, Philip. I appreciate this.
Thank you so much. So nice to talk to you.